Hello and welcome to the FF News Virtual Arena. I'm your host Doug McKenzie, and on today's show we're going to be looking at African innovation in the fintech scene, and joining me I have three guests right at the heart of that topic. First up we have Gwerna Kiwana, the founder in residence for crypto at MFS Africa. Gwerna, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. Thank you so much for having me here. Good to see you again, Ben.
It's an absolute pleasure and great seeing you again too. Gwerna, could you tell our audience a bit more about yourself and what you've been working on recently, please?
Absolutely. So a little bit about me. I'm fintech nerd, BaaS payments nerd as well. But more recently have decided to double, triple down on working on the continent in Africa. So as a Ugandan, I'm obviously quite passionate about what's going on here. And as a fintech nerd, I just decided that this is the time to blend my passions and my identity. So I'm currently leading the crypto strategy and executing on it here at MFS Africa. We've only just started wading into the space in a very deliberate manner. Truly do believe that Web3, fintech, crypto, and fintech, really the intersection of all those is going to be the future of the continent. So I'm really excited to share more about that and be part of this conversation. So MFS Africa is a very interesting company, actually. So we are the largest African payments hub on the continent. We're specialized quite heavily in moving money around, and out of the continent as well. So really across various channels, from banks to cash to the most ubiquitous form of payment across the continent, which is mobile money. So that's what we do here at MFS Africa.
Yeah, I think that really hits the nail on the head of where we're going to be steering this conversation. So I'm quite excited to hear more on that. Thank you so much. And also joining us, we have Matteo Barnard from BBD. Matthew, how are you doing today? You good?
Yes, doing very well, thanks. And yourself?
Oh, absolutely amazing. Really excited to have you on. And Matthew, could you also tell us a bit more about BBD and your role there too?
Yeah, sure. I'm Matteo Barnard. I'm Executive Director at BBD. BBD is a South African company. But I'm actually based in London, as we've been actually expanding from South Africa through into London and into the wider Europe. What we're trying to do is really reverse the tide a little bit, bringing innovative technology and innovative thinking from Africa actually into Europe. So reversing that tide a little bit, which is actually quite interesting. So I think what we're trying to do is work with smaller financial services companies throughout Europe and actually bring them sort of innovative technology ideas, some digital transformation, really do it in a more cost-effective manner. And we're really using some of the experience we've had over the last 30 years working in Africa and how we do things there on a tight budget. Just really make sure that our clients in Europe are actually getting bang for their buck. And so I'd really like to sort of share some of that experience with you today about how we're doing that.
Well, I'm really excited to hear, and I love this notion of bringing this innovation and showcasing it. And I'm really excited to hear some of those exciting use cases that I'm sure you're going to provide us. So thank you so much, Matthew. And also joining us, we're Matteo Rizzi, the co-founder at FTS Group.eu. And Matteo, how are you doing? You good?
I'm great. Thank you, Doug.
Amazing. And I guess I've got to ask you as well. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people already know what you've been working on, but what have you been doing currently?
So I'm currently in Dubai, on my way to spend a few days in Africa. Last time it was 4 weeks ago, so that gives you an idea on how often I'm in a continent. I really worked in financial services for the past 20 years, passed at Swift for 13 years. I would say that for this conversation, not to be too long, my involvement with the continent is since 2015, when I was working for a media network, which is today is called Flourish Ventures, but is the largest investor in Africa. Did a couple of deals with them, including Flutterwave, which is one of the unicorns. And then with Bamboo Capital Partners, kept investing in seed stage in Africa. But I also have a platform called timepledge.org, which is a free coaching platform for soft skills for African entrepreneurs, which we deployed already in 7 countries. We are currently working, if you ask the question of, now, in one of the largest events in the continent ever made. As far as fintech is concerned, is going to happen in Kigali. I cannot announce it just yet, but it's a collaboration between MIS Singapore and Rwanda Finance. It will be announced officially on February 2nd. So just stay between us, a few thousand people listening.
We'll keep our ears peeled and our eyes peeled. Absolutely amazing, Matteo. Thank you so much. Now, guys, with that done, I'm really excited, and I think we've got to set the scene first. And Gwerna, since you were mentioning, you were kind of hinting towards having some insight onto this, I've got to come to you first. And how would you describe the fintech, but maybe more specifically the payment scene across obviously the very huge continent of Africa? What's really caught your eye in some of the use cases out there?
Yeah, so payments in Africa is quite fragmented, right? If we can describe payments in Europe, or say for North America, for example, as 1% finished, in Africa it's 0.01% finished. In that there's a lot of really cool companies and people building really thoughtful products and services. But I think I'm mostly interested in talking about who's building the pipes and the infrastructure across the continent. So this is still quite fragmented, and it's a massive continent with 54 different countries, minimum of 54 different languages, and regulators even. So it's the companies connecting these markets to each other are doing a lot of the heavy lifting. So MFS Africa being one of them. We do quite a lot of facilitation of cross-border payments within Africa. So within specific like various busy corridors, like say Uganda, Kenya, Nigeria, Ghana. So it's quite, like I said, fragmented. And but if you take a closer look, you will see that a lot of the activity that's happening is kind of in two buckets, right? So there's cross-border payments between specific corridors, like I said, like Uganda, Kenya, Nigeria, Ghana, South Africa, Zimbabwe. But there's also a lot of remittance flows coming into the continent from abroad. So companies that are able to kind of do this work and heavy lifting have done quite a great feat, but we're still not quite there yet, because this is still not happening synchronously. A lot of times we're seeing payments. It appears instant, right? But it's actually happening via pre-funding. So pre-funding accounts and wallets on one side, and then messages going back and forth to connect these. For example, the SWIFT system is just something that hasn't really penetrated. It's not purpose built for the continent. So we found a lot of aggregators and hubs like ourselves that kind of doing this work to do this. So it's quite a complicated space, but there's a lot of people building the pipes, which is what I'm most excited about.
Definitely, you've got to really start with that architecture, the infrastructure, and then the innovation can travel alongside that. And I'd like to hear, Matthew, from you some of that innovation and looking at what you've seen from that, especially when it comes to payments leading embedded finance. If we could look at that as well, and I come to you with that, Matthew. How are you seeing the African continent leading the way in terms of innovation there?
I agree with Gwerna in terms of there's a lot of fragmentation in that, and actually getting that sort of like underlying infrastructure in place, I think, is really, really a challenge. Yeah. I think what I am seeing is there's a hell of a lot of innovation happening, and people now with access to technology, access to internet, access to sort of like public cloud infrastructure, are actually able to innovate faster and faster. And I think that's what's quite exciting. There are organizations out there that are trying to build a ubiquitous infrastructure and do that. I know the Gates Foundation with their Mojo Loop thing are trying to do something like in that space, and that's all getting some traction. That the building infrastructure, as we know, is very, very difficult. I think where things have changed is previously companies from Europe or America were coming in and trying to put in European and American solutions into Africa. I think the tide that's changed is actually Africans and African countries are doing it for themselves and actually developing solutions that actually are very specific for them, and that's really cool. And I think that's where the excitement comes in. So, there's a lot happening. Is it embedded finance as we'd understand it in Europe? No, I don't think so, because embedded finance sort of infers that actually there's other finance there and you're embedding within it. I think there's a lot of very good point solutions in place that are doing that. And I think, as Gwerna mentioned, I think remittances, cross-border payments and that are actually very important. And one of the key things there is I think the costs of the current infrastructure to make those payments are far too high. And really what we're looking for is, mobile money and what Gwerna is doing there in terms of how do we actually lower that cost and actually enable it, because we're really moving from what I would see is a continent that's really working on cash And what we're wanting is a cash equivalent that's digital. We're not really looking for bank accounts. And really there's a big change here. And so a lot of innovation happening, very exciting, and a lot of really good skills out there.
I think that's such an exciting way to look at innovation. It's the slate has been wiped clean. It's looking at it in a different way. We've already broken the banks. It's looking at mobiles. It's understanding finance in that different sphere, and again also then looking at how important cross-border is going to be, especially in those channels, East Africa, South Africa. It's going to be so exciting to see what can come out of that almost untethered innovation. So Matteo, let's look at the kind of customer demands then. We've already heard that maybe remittances, cross-border payments are too expensive in the region. What are some of the biggest customer demands for financial services across Africa?
So what we've been doing so far, and this, the fragmented is really a key word, but there are two more, and one is not interoperable, and the other word super important is very uneven. Okay, so which Africa we're talking about? So because when we talk about customer demand, and from a country like Mozambique, which is 60 million people and there is no Uber, or to a country like Angola, where there is not yet a digital bank implanted because the regulator cannot make it, or even like a country of a way more visible one like Rwanda, for example. You talked about embedded finance. In Rwanda, there is the Oyster card of London. It's called Tap and Go. It's called Tap and Go in Kigali. There are 1 million cards in Kigali, and the total bank accounts in Kigali is 250,000 people. So there is one transportation company that releases 4 times the number of cards than the total number of bank accounts in the city. So the moment that this startups gets the permission to actually charge these cards with actual money and doing transaction, not just paying buses, they become the first fintech of the country. So the customer demand today is driven not by financial services, but actually by day-to-day life. Another example in Francophone Africa, which is not yet very much overseen, even by investor, or at least it just started, I would say, in the past couple of years. Look at super apps like GoZem, obviously. So GoZem is a combination of a Uber for motorbikes and a delivery company. But at the end of the day, they see themselves as a fintech. Why? Yeah. Because talking about customer demand, they financing vehicles for the users, they take digital payments, they cross-sell the insurance services. So customer demand, it is very hard to give one answer. You give us or any specific ecosystem in Africa for historical and also technical reasons as different customer demands that drives financial inclusion in this case.
Yeah, and I think, Matthew, you've actually mentioned this a bit yourself as well. You're seeing this customer demand being a driving force and kind of wiping the slate clean when it comes to embracing innovation. So as a result, do you think that the customer demands are higher? I know Matteo is breaking down Africa into various different areas, as you have to because of its size. But as a general rule, do you think that because of the lack of banking infrastructure, the demands just from everyday customers is higher from what they get from a fintech?
Yeah, I believe so. I mean, I think, cash has always been the way business has been done in the majority of transactions. But, given sort of like, I suppose, technology, given that the majority of people have quite a sophisticated mobile device with them most of the time, for security reasons and that as well, is actually having that access to technology or access to digitization of digital currencies or mobile money is actually becoming really important in that. So I don't think it's increasing the number of actual transactions, because I think the number of cash transactions are actually quite high at the moment. But it is increasing the proportion of those transactions that actually are moving digital. And that's what's really growing very, very rapidly. And so the fintechs that are actually able to support that, I think, are the ones that actually are being successful in terms of driving innovation and driving adoption.
Absolutely amazing. Now, I think always the best way to kind of understand an industry and is through comparison. And Gwerna, could I get your perspective on the contrast that you've seen between some of the traditional banking scenes in, as you mentioned, North America, sorry, and Europe, where you mentioned obviously it was like 1% done. What are some of the biggest contrasts that you notice and you think are really exciting too?
Yeah, so I think first of all, Matthew mentioned how we're seeing a wave of bias for us products and services and solutions being built, rather than taking tons of VC money and large North American global North companies coming to Africa and building things that people just don't want or won't use. So I think first of all, we're starting to see like a lot more of that happening here. Second, I would say like one thing that I've seen as a major, I guess, difference is, even though I'm also going to contradict what Matthew said, is that whilst we're seeing a rapid digitization of things, of financial services, we're still seeing explosive cash usage. We're still seeing a lot of people across the continent. As I don't have a figure off the top of my head, but I'd say like a pretty about 80 to 90% of people on the continent are using cash in one way or another every single day of their lives, and that's not going to slow down anytime soon. And I think the days of over innovating and digitization at all costs is kind of coming to an end, I think, because first of all, VC money has dried up. Second, tourism fintech is over, in that large global fintechs or financial services companies, banks, for example, coming in and trying to innovate. That's hopefully, I think, coming to an end. But we're seeing an explosion in growth of things like agency banking models. So agent networks like the one MFS Africa has, like Baxi. We're seeing Paga in Nigeria as well. Across the mobile network operators and who have mobile money schemes, use of agents is explosive. So that human connection. Despite things being faster and a lot more efficient, there's still quite a bit of the culture across. It's not monolithic at all, but it's a lot more community centric. A lot more human interaction is required, and also in low trust economies and societies, like say for example Nigeria, where there's a lot of checks and balances, a lot of things you need to do to get a bank account in the first place, but having your money live in mobile money and seeing a real person who's able to help you take your money out into cash or deposit your money or move it around, an agent, for example, is really important. So I'd say like cash is still king. Human interaction just incredibly vital. And then lastly, the agency model is I hope we see a lot more innovation in that. But yeah, that's how I would say like the three things that really differentiate the continent of Africa with the rest of the world.
Yeah, and Matteo, would you agree? We're seeing that human interaction being so key to success on the African continent, and agency work and all that. Do you think those are the three outstanding differences?
Certainly, I was actually thinking of that's super true at the, I want to say, like a cultural level. Then at the technical level, I think that paradoxically speaking, there is more quick data, easily accessible in Africa than in other parts of the world, which is why like instant lending, based on mobile data, for example, is something that mainly only exists on the continent. I mean, there is one startup in Italy that tried to do the same thing that Shivani's company, Tala, Shivani Seroya, San Francisco-based, the Tala company, multi-million-dollar funded. They did 2 billion small loans, instant loans through phone. There is nothing at this scale that is possible in in Western economies. Simply because the way of interacting with the phone and the development of the application based on that type of information is simply not comparable.
Interesting.
Just adding that piece.
Yeah, and Matthew, this kind of actually then leads on to what you were speaking about in your introduction in terms of kind of exporting African innovation into the European scene. And I'd love to hear your kind of recipe for enabling it to thrive, please.
Yeah, I think, if you look at, when I look at innovation, as I see, it's really based on need and demand on that. And so the less you have, the actual more you have to innovate and have to think out of the box to come up with creative solutions to do that. And I think that's a mindset that many people working in Africa have been doing. We've been obviously doing a lot of work in South Africa for the last 30 years. Our company is based there and has grown up there. And so that mindset of how do you innovate with very little and how do you come up with creative solutions, is that innovative thinking is what we take. So when we actually work with our clients in Europe, much of our development is done out of Southern Africa. Yeah. And what we're doing is actually taking that mindset of doing something on quite a tight budget and doing it innovatively, rather than having access to, thousands of type of highly complex, resources and products available. It's actually, how can you do that simply? And given technology and the way and the speed in which you can implement it today, there's quite a lot that can actually be done that actually is really sort of keep it simple. And that's really sort of we're trying to bring to our clients, and that so it's not the products, all right. So the products from Europe and North America are valid for Europe and North America. The products for Africa, which are being built in Africa, are very valid for Africa. But actually, the innovation we have in Africa, that innovative thinking, can be brought out and applied to European sort of financial services and the problems that we're dealing with there. And that's what we're trying to do, is actually bring some of the innovation out and apply it to the problems that we're seeing here. And that's what we're finding quite interesting. And our clients are actually finding the slightly different view and a different look on that sort of problem solving really, really interesting for them as well.
Yeah. Oh, that's absolutely brilliant. And it's such an exciting time to see innovation from across the world, because I think that fintech culture is actually the way that people pay for things is such a key definer in how you embrace fintech technology. And that leads me perfectly onto my next question, and that's kind of looking at new ways to pay and how important that is. So where it's not just the fintech or the telecom companies across the African continent that are leading the way. We're also seeing, for instance, the incumbent banks doing quite well. And can you tell us about that and how that intersects with you guys at MFS Africa? Tell us a bit more.
Yeah, so I'd say I have a healthy respect for incumbent banks. I think if you asked me this question a couple of years ago when I was younger and a lot more jaded about traditional banking, I wouldn't say this, but I have a healthy respect for incumbents, especially when it comes to their attempts to innovate and their attempts to drive the ecosystem and technology and adoption ahead. I'd say one thing in this way that I have seen that's quite similar in the global north and in Africa is that there's a lot of collaboration between incumbent banks and fintechs and incumbent banks and startups in general. That is needed to kind of keep things going. So I'd say like one of the earliest examples we saw was banks like Standard Bank in East Africa adopting the agency bank. I've come back to agency banking model, which to reach farther, right? So instead of using the playbook that was, hey, you want to get more customers, okay, get more ATMs out. Yeah, doesn't work. Build more branches, doesn't work still. So they decided to kind of, let's look at what the MNOs, so like mobile network operators like MTN are doing and Safaricom. Okay, they've grown this agency banking model. Maybe we try that as well. And we try to meet the customer where they're at. Banks are kind of, they're working very closely with tech companies and fintechs specifically in other ways, like understanding customer needs and customer problems. We're seeing companies like in Kenya, for example, like InsurTech Lami, partnering with various banks to do embedded insurance, right? To meet customers where they're at, because insurance products, traditional insurance products just are not fit for purpose. So microinsurance, for example, I think someone once described as nano insurance. on the continent
Wow.
is taking off, and banks can learn from that. So I think incumbents have, a lot of obstacles of their own, and not, forget about regulation and maintaining the licenses and the very expensive licenses that they have. But they're starting to listen, and I think it requires a lot more collaboration, and it sounds so cliche, but a lot more collaboration between fintechs, mobile network operators who kind of hold the keys to financial inclusion on the continent, and fintechs as well. So yeah, I think that's kind of the state of play right now that I think is happening on the continent.
Very
And in
interesting.
certain regions as well.
Definitely, and I think that's a common theme through what we're seeing through this conversation. Is it is such a regional-based situation, and I completely agree with you, Gwerna. If you'd asked me a couple of years ago, I probably would have had a different response. But Matthew, you're actually based out of South Africa, and I've seen it. In the southern part of the continent, there seems to be a huge amount of work when it comes to, for instance, cross-border and innovation from those incumbents. Do you have any specific kind of use cases that you've seen from your area of expertise?
I think there is a lot happening there. I just think there's still quite a lot more to be done. I don't think that problem's really been solved. I think there are various initiatives happening sort of throughout Africa to try and actually get a consensus or a way of working that will actually allow that sort of cross-border and remittance and innovation to happen, but it's just not really there yet.
Yeah.
I think one thing I am seeing, is I think, and Gwerna mentioned this as well, was I think the mobile network operators have a large place to play here. They are actually, becoming more and more, so to say, ubiquitous across the whole continent. And they're also, I think, like in many parts in the world, the telco operators are becoming more linked into financial services and offering financial services products. And I think they're the sort of possibly the start of an infrastructure that actually could be built on. And I think that's interesting. I think also what we're seeing as well is I know in South Africa specifically, is many of them are starting to take a lead from what they're seeing happening in Asia. So they're not really taking a European, North American model. They're actually looking at the some of the innovation and innovative platforms happening in Asia in terms of embedding multiple applications within a single app and actually creating multiple services for their clients. And I see that they're taking their lead from there rather than necessarily taking the lead from elsewhere. So that's that to me is quite interesting to see how that's going to pan out in the next couple of years.
It is a brilliant combination of fintech, finance, and just general consumer-facing apps. I was over in South Africa last year speaking with M-Pesa, finding out about their super app that they're developing, and I think you can obviously take some of the examples as you mentioned there, Matthew. Weixin from over in China, and how that's going to play out, I think could be such a more exciting ecosystem than what we're seeing in, for instance, Europe.
I think it's just to build on that point. I think it's developing world taking the lead from other developing countries around the world, whether it happens to be South America, Asia, or whatever, and applying that thinking is probably more appropriate to the markets we find ourselves in. And I think that's really what's guiding it, I think.
I can imagine. Yeah, it's such a better playbook to run by, rather than trying to fit different needs, different demands into the same financial system and create one that doesn't work. Matteo, I've got to get your perspective then on what lessons the traditional banks across the African continent can learn from then, if we're going to be running by that playbook, to use the same metaphor again. What are the lessons that they need to learn to thrive in this new ecosystem?
So once again, I think that ecosystems where bank witnessed, the fintech as a real enabler in terms of financial inclusion, technology lever, sort of broaden the financial services, like a way to expand financial literacy. It is easier for them to understand the collaboration lesson, right? Because it's they've seen, they have an historical data, they have seen how this collaboration can be fruitful. But there are actually other countries and ecosystems where banks are still like dominating the scene, and dominating the scene in a good or in a bad way. But we are talking about they are the only place to go to get a loan, for example, and
Okay.
which is not a sharp one, So, for example, or they are the one who basically they're lobbying not to get digital financial services expand because, and again, it is cultural, but it's also a natural reaction. Now, the more the more time passes, the easier it becomes to not only learn the lesson, but these lessons, but simply sort of look at the history. Now it is so much easier right now to talk to a bank than 10 years ago, when even and I've been there for the record. Even the Citibank or the Santander or the poster child of innovation of today, back then, they were like really hesitant, and not even talking to each other. Now it is completely the opposite, in the sense that it is very hard not to see the benefit of a thriving ecosystem under several points of view, being the GDP, being the number of jobs that you create, the number of talents that you can attract, and so forth. So yeah.
Absolutely brilliant. Well, speaking of those kind of opportunities that can come out, Matteo, I'm going to stick with you for our last question that I'm going to wrap up with. And something I like to always bring to the virtual arena is an element of use cases, real life stories. And with what incredible stories or use cases have you heard from fintechs operating across the continent that have made you sit up and go, okay, wow, that is absolutely going to transform finance for millions?
Well, I always tell the FTS Group story in Kigali, which I already told. There are many incredible stories. Maybe I'll give one more. There is this agri-tech company in Senegal, which is using data from satellite images to figure out how much water and where the fields are needing it. But it quickly became a fintech because there is now insurance products that are cross-sold to the farmers.
Yeah.
Based on data. Based on these data. So it's a brilliant combination. It's something that. It is a brilliant combination, and it fuels the statement that everything is a fintech in Africa. Because at the end of the day, you always has a component which is a payment and insurance, and it's very rare, beside the large ecosystem, the Kenyas, the Nigerias, the South Africa, maybe the Egypt, but it's very complicated to make a single country successful fintech that attracts, real capital. So by definition, they have to think global, or they have to become a catalyst for innovation. So there are very little successful mono-product, mono-services fintech in, I want to say, second and third tiers markets in Africa, which are the most interesting to me right now.
Yeah. I mean, that really does highlight just how important kind of embedded finance is in the sector, and the fact that you have to succeed in various different options. Modernization, digitization is transforming across businesses, across industries. So Matthew, could I also get your perspective on this use cases before I come to Gwerna, before we wrap up?
Yeah. And if I can maybe, just talking about turning the tide, in terms of, traditionally, services and products from Europe have been flowing into Africa, and how do we, and my job is to get it flowing back the other way, to balance that, so a project we did recently was, there was a small financial services company in London, operating in a niche market, selling certain products, savings, investment products and that, pretty good, well-run company, but actually they hadn't digitized. And what we did was took some of the technology and innovative approaches that we use in a lot of our African clients, and we actually applied that to their business. And they were quite surprised by that. And they were surprised in terms of, we went in there and said, look, we looked at what they're doing, and we said, we could probably save you about 50% of your back office operating costs. And they were like,
wow,
no way. And we started the project about 18 months ago, and we actually hit that 50% mark in December. And they were like shocked by that. It's fantastic, and we love it. But what I think I'm trying to make a point by that is, there's that innovative thinking and way of actually doing work and doing work on a budget that can be applied, to European markets as well. And that so when I'm sort of turning the tide is, BBD, we like to do work and we make a big difference in the African markets that we work in, but we also actually taking that innovation and applying it to European markets as well, with very similar impact and effects. So, cases like that are actually quite interesting. And to me, that reversing that flow between where technologies come from and now me bringing it back into Europe, I think is quite exciting. And that's something that I'm thinking is really, really interesting. And I would expect to see more of that in the future rather than less.
Well, it sounds like an absolutely exciting time, especially when you're getting bottom lines like that. And also, Gwerna, could I also, to finish up, get your perspectives too on some use cases that you think are going to really go the distance?
Yeah, I could sit here and talk a lot about the use cases that we at MFS Africa have enabled that have exploded various usage across the continent. So, everything from being able to allow mobile money payments as a form of collections for various businesses, international businesses as well, but all the way through to enabling disbursements for global development organizations. But I'm going to kind of change gears and I'm going to give one example of a startup that I'm particularly excited about in Kenya. It's called Quara. So these guys are a BaaS, they're embedded finance banking as a service platform that have gone after an incredibly ubiquitous, but also incredibly loyal customer base with a super underserved in terms of financial, fintech services ecosystem, which is called SACCOs. So SACCOs, which is basically community banks in Kenya. So majority of Kenyans are connected to a SACCO, and it's usually my mom or whoever else was in a SACCO. I get better savings rates. It's community savings as well. So this has been pretty analog for years and years, forever. And these community banks don't have the resources to actually go digital. So Quara has kind of stepped in and then basically they first of all supported these SACCOs to digitize and to provide their members and their customers really with really good digital products that also help with retention, even though they don't need help with retention because SACCO members are very, very loyal. But they kind of achieved product market fit and cornered this really deep and, like I said, technologically underserved market across Kenya. So a couple things that they've done is they've gone after that, right? Product market fit, but also cornering an incredibly underserved and very massive market. Second thing they've done is really just done that at scale too. So pretty kudos to them. Second thing they've done is they've become hometown heroes. So in the sense that a lot of growth that we're seeing for African fintechs is to, all right, you've conquered Kenya, or you've launched in Kenya, or you've launched in Uganda. Next thing, go to Nigeria. Actually, go to Ghana, then go to South Africa. I personally don't fully agree with that model because it's incredibly difficult. It's super, even us in MFS Africa, we're Pan-African. But even then, it's quite difficult to win and even compete in markets outside of your home market because of all the nuances of how different it is. And we're seeing this new crop of African fintechs that are doubling, tripling down on their home markets to actually provide niche, solid services that actually change their end users' lives. So I think the use cases that I'm seeing are the ones that are kind of doing that. So not only cornering and finding product market fit in at scale, but also being hometown heroes and kind of scrapping this idea of growth at all costs and just really focusing on their home markets and being experts in those home markets. And there's a lot in South Africa that I've seen as well, Ethiopia, Nigeria, Kenya, Uganda, and I hope we see more of that.
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely, it's such an interesting thing. And I think it's something that, to kind of echo some of the theme of this talk, it's something that maybe Europe and North America is also looking at with the huge fintech investment realignment that we're seeing is actually, rather than expanding at growth at all costs, it is nail that home market. And I think that's going to be very exciting to really get some use cases that mean more to a certain amount of people rather than everyone. Guys, I've got to say a massive thank you for your inputs. It's absolutely fascinating, and I'm really excited to hear some of those use cases. And so I want to say a big thank you as well. And also a big thank you to you, our viewers, because you can catch the rest of the series and much more over at ffnews.com and of course YouTube, but especially LinkedIn, where you'll see me in the comments. Thanks very much, guys, and goodbye.